28, I thought I understood betrayal, but nothing prepared me for this. "I've got an offer to sell the Czar's table," my stepfather Rick announced, his smile as cold as the Chicago night. The words slammed into me, stealing my breath. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was my father's soul, my life's work. My eyes darted to my mother, searching for an ally, but she just stared at her hands, silent. That's when I knew. I, Eleanor Petrov, wasn't in a family meeting. I was at my own execution, and my mother had just handed them the knife. Before I share the rest of my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to fight for what you love, especially against the people you thought you could trust, hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you are going to want to see how this ends. I stood in the heart of the Czar's table, my father's restaurant, on a biting Chicago evening in late November. The air was thick with the scent of dill, warm black bread, and the earthy tang of borscht simmering in the kitchen. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the dining room, where every table was packed. Reservations booked solid for months, since that glowing Chicago Tribune review called us a treasured bastion of culinary history. I moved through the room, nodding to regulars, my black dress swishing against my legs, my smile practiced, but genuine. At 28, I'd learned to carry myself with the grace of an owner, even if my mind was tangled in inventory lists and payroll deadlines. 5 years ago, my father, Mikhail Petrov, died suddenly, a heart attack at 52, right here in this dining room. His dream, this place, was a crumbling relic back then, barely scraping by. I'd poured every ounce of myself into saving it, turning it into the triumph it was tonight. I could still hear his voice, thick with that Russian accent he never lost, teaching me to fold pelmeni just right, to infuse vodka with horseradish and honey until it sang on the tongue. Every bottle behind the bar, every recipe on the menu was his. This place was him. And I'd made it thrive. I slipped into my small office at the back, the hum of the restaurant muffled by the heavy door. The night's receipts were stacked neatly on my desk, a small victory I allowed myself to savor. I leaned back, closing my eyes, picturing Papa's proud grin. He'd have loved this, every seat filled, every plate a piece of his soul. My phone buzzed, shattering the moment. A text from Rick, my stepfather. "Family summit. Our place. Now. Don't be late. No please, no warmth, just a command." My stomach twisted. Rick Davies, the slick financial advisor my mother married a year after Papa died, had a way of making my skin crawl. I hated how he'd inserted himself into our lives, his smarmy smile masking something I could never quite name. I grabbed my coat, locked the office, and stepped out into the icy Chicago night, the warmth of the restaurant fading behind me. The drive to their Gold Coast condo was a blur of streetlights and dread. I didn't know what Rick wanted, but it wasn't good. It never was. The condo was a world away from the cozy wood-paneled home I'd grown up in. Rick and my mother, Eleanor, lived in a sleek, modern box of chrome and glass, every trace of my father's warmth stripped away. I stepped inside, my boots clicking on the cold marble floor, and found my mother perched on a stark white leather couch. She looked smaller than I remembered, her eyes distant, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. "Eleanor, sweetheart," Rick said, his voice dripping with fake warmth as he emerged from the kitchen, a glass of scotch in hand. "So glad you made it." I didn't sit. "What's this about, Rick?" He smiled, that crocodile tear smile I'd come to loathe. "Wonderful news, actually. I've got an offer to sell the Czar's table to Sterling Hospitality Group. $5 million, can you imagine?" The room tilted. My breath caught in my throat. "You have no right," I snapped, my voice low but shaking. "That's Papa's restaurant, my restaurant." "Oh, Eleanor." He set his glass down, his calm infuriating. "I have every right." He slid a document across the glass coffee table. Not a prenup, but something far worse. A power of attorney I'd signed 2 years ago when I'd had a health scare, a moment of weakness when I thought I might not make it. It gave Rick control over Mama's assets, which, since their marriage, included her 49% stake in the Czar's table. Legally, he could act on her behalf. Legally, he could sell. I turned to Mama, my heart pounding. "You're okay with this?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her silence was a knife. "You can't stop it, Eleanor," Rick said almost gently. "You're a minority shareholder. This is happening." I felt the walls closing in, the air too thin. This wasn't a summit. It was an execution. My father's dream, My life's work was being ripped away, and my own mother sat there, complicit. I stumbled out, barely hearing Rick's voice calling after me. The cold night air hit my face like a slap as I slid into my car, my hands trembling on the wheel. I drove back to the restaurant, the only place that still felt like home. The next morning I met Julian Vance at a dimly lit steakhouse in the Loop, the kind of place where old Chicago money dined on porterhouses and martinis. He was older than I expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and a quiet dignity that felt like the opposite of Rick's slickness. He ordered a Manhattan, the cherry glinting in the low light, and spoke about Papa with a reverence that made my throat tight. "Mikhail was a genius," he said, his voice soft. "The Tsar's table isn't just a restaurant, it's a legacy. I hate seeing places like that swallowed by corporate vultures like Sterling." I nodded, my hands clenched around my coffee mug. "They're taking it, Rick's selling it out from under me." Julian leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "What if I could stop it?" I froze. "How?" "I'll buy your 51% controlling interest for $5.5 million, he said. "But I'm not here to take over. My contract ensures you stay on as general manager, full operational control. The name stays, the staff stays. I'm a silent partner, Eleanor. I want to preserve what Mikhail built." It was too good to be true, a lifeline, a miracle. My heart surged, a flicker of hope igniting in the ashes of last night's despair. "You mean it?" I whispered. He smiled, sliding a contract across the table. "Read it, take it to your lawyer, but I think you'll like what you see." I skimmed the pages, my pulse racing. It was all there. My control, the staff's security, Papa's name etched in stone. We shook hands, and Julian pulled out a small, antique silver vodka flask, intricately engraved. "A toast to a new partnership," he said, pouring a shot of crystal-clear vodka from a bottle he'd brought, "to Mikhail's enduring spirit." I took the flask, its weight solid in my hand, and drank. The vodka burned, sharp and clean, like a promise. We signed the initial papers right there, his lawyer already working to finalize everything. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I left the steakhouse walking taller, with the contract tucked in my bag like a shield. I drove back to the Gold Coast condo, ready to face Rick. This time I wasn't the defeated daughter. I had a plan. I had hope. I strode into the condo, my chin high. Rick was there, sipping his scotch, Mama still on that damn couch. "Your deal's dead," I said, tossing the contract on the table. "I sold my 51% to Julian Vance. The Tsar's table is mine." Rick's face didn't change. He just smirked. My stomach dropped. The door opened behind me. Julian Vance walked in, his calm demeanor gone, replaced by something colder. Behind him was Lachlan Pierce, the shark-like CEO of Sterling Hospitality. "Eleanor," Julian said, his voice smooth as ice, "you really should have read the fine print." Turning point. My world shattered again. Julian wasn't my savior. He was Sterling's puppet, a boutique acquisitions consultant who'd played me like a fiddle. The contract I'd signed had an immediate assignment of rights clause. Julian had bought my shares, then instantly handed them to Sterling. They owned 51%. Rick's $5 million deal was back on and I was out. I turned to Mama, my voice breaking. "You knew?" She was crying now, but not out of shock. "It was for the best, Eleanor," she whispered. "It was too much for you." The betrayal cut deeper than Rick's smirk. My own mother had let this happen. I was alone. Truly alone. And the Tsar's table was gone. I stumbled out of the condo, my ears ringing with Julian's cold words and Mama's guilty whisper. The Chicago night was merciless, the wind slicing through my coat as I slid into my car. I didn't drive to the restaurant this time. I couldn't face it, not after losing it all over again. Instead, I headed to my apartment, a cramped one-bedroom in Wicker Park that smelled faintly of coffee and old books. I collapsed onto the couch, the contract with Julian's signature burning a hole in my bag. How had I been so stupid? I'd let hope blind me, let a stranger's charm and a silver flask make me think I could win. The flask. I pulled it out, its engraved surface catching the dim light. It felt like a taunt, a trophy of my failure. I turned it over in my hands, my thumb brushing against the base. Something clicked. A faint seam appeared, and when I twisted, a tiny compartment popped open. Inside was a micro SD card, no bigger than my thumbnail. My heart thudded. This wasn't an accident. I called Tommy, a former bartender from the Tsar's table who'd always been good with tech. He showed up an hour later, his lanky frame filling my doorway, a laptop under his arm. "What's the emergency, boss?" he asked, his grin fading when he saw my face. I handed him the card. "I need to know what's on this, now." Tommy plugged it into his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. The files were encrypted, but he cracked them in under an hour, muttering about shoddy security. When the screen lit up with spreadsheets, my breath caught. These weren't restaurant ledgers. They were Rick's. Pages of transactions, shell companies, transfers to offshore accounts. He'd been siphoning money from Mama's accounts, my accounts, for years. The Tsar's table was just the latest piece of his scheme. The $5 million sale to Sterling wasn't about the restaurant's value. It was a way to launder his dirty money into a legitimate deal. And then the gut punch. A scanned affidavit, signed by Mama a year ago. She'd known about Rick's investment irregularities, but agreed not to pursue legal action in exchange for his continued care. My mother hadn't just let him steal from us, she'd covered for him, traded my father's legacy to protect herself from his threats. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. "Tommy," I whispered, "this is everything." He nodded, his face grim. "You've got him, Eleanor. But what are you going to do with it?" The gala was a mockery of everything Papa stood for. Sterling had draped the Tsar's table in gaudy gold banners, their logo plastered everywhere. The dining room smelled of overpriced cologne and corporate ambition, not dill or borscht. I slipped in with the press, my pass clipped to my blazer, the micro SD card tucked in my pocket. My heart pounded, but I kept my head down, blending into the crowd of journalists and influencers, snapping photos of the new era for my father's restaurant. I spotted Rick first, schmoozing with a glass of champagne, his arm around Mama. She looked like a ghost, her smile forced, her eyes darting away from mine. Julian was there too, laughing with Lachlan Pierce, Sterling's CEO, whose sharp grin reminded me of a shark circling blood. I wanted to scream, to throw the evidence in their faces, but I waited. Timing was everything. I knew the restaurant better than anyone. Slipping past a distracted security guard, I made my way to the wine cellar, Papa's favorite place, where he'd spent hours choosing bottles to pair with his recipes. It was quiet, the air cool and musty. I hid behind a rack of Merlots, waiting for my moment. It came when Rick, Julian, and Pierce slipped into the cellar for a private toast, Mama trailing behind. I stepped out, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. "Nice party," I said, holding up the micro SD card. "Too bad it's built on lies." Rick's face hardened. Pierce laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "What's this, Eleanor? A tantrum?" I laid it out, the embezzlement, the shell companies, Julian's role as a front, Mama's coerced silence. I watched their expressions shift, Rick's smirk faltering, Pierce's eyes narrowing. Mama's face crumpled, tears spilling, but I didn't stop. "I've sent this to the SEC and IRS, I said, pulling out my phone, "and there's an investigative journalist upstairs with a live audio feed. You've got 5 minutes before this goes public. Unless we make a new deal. My deal." Pierce stepped forward, his voice low. "You're bluffing. You'll ruin yourself too." "Try me," I said, my finger hovering over the send button. Rick lunged, grabbing for the phone, but I was faster, twisting away. Julian blocked the door, his calm mask gone, replaced by something desperate. "You don't know what you're doing, Eleanor," he hissed. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I shot back. "Sterling voids the sale of my 51%. You buy out Rick and Mama's 49% for $1 to avoid a scandal. Rick signs a confession and returns every cent he stole. I keep the Tsar's table, 100%, or the world hears this." I tapped my phone, the audio feed crackling to life. Mama sobbed, her voice breaking. "Eleanor, please." I wanted to feel sorry for her, but all I felt was rage. She'd chosen Rick over me, over Papa. I held Pierce's gaze, unblinking. He was the first to crack, nodding slowly. "Fine, your terms." Turning point. Rick's face went white as he signed the confession, his hands shaking. Pierce agreed to void the sale, and Julian slunk away, his polished facade shattered. I walked out of the cellar, the micro SD card still in my pocket, my restaurant mine again. But as I stepped into the dining room, the victory felt hollow. I'd won, but at what cost? The days after the gala were a blur. Rick was arrested for fraud, his smug face plastered across the news. Sterling's acquisition collapsed and Julian's Vance Group was under SEC scrutiny. The Tsar's table was mine, free and clear. But I didn't feel like celebrating. I moved out of my apartment and into a smaller one, needing distance from Mama's betrayal. Our relationship was a wound that wouldn't heal. Not yet. We texted, short and careful, but every word felt like a step on broken glass. I reopened the restaurant and the buzz was insane. Reporters called it a David versus Goliath story and reservations poured in. But every time I walked through the dining room I saw Mama's tears, Rick's smirk, Julian's betrayal. I saw Papa's face in every corner and it hurt. One quiet Sunday before service I was wiping down the bar when Mama walked in. She looked older, her hands clutching a small pot. "Borscht," she said softly. "From Mikhail's recipe." I froze, my throat tight. She set the pot down, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in weeks. "He'd be proud, Eleanor, not just that you saved it, but how you fought for it." I took a spoonful, the familiar warmth of beets and dill flooding my senses. Tears stung my eyes. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I whispered. "I know," she said, her voice breaking, "but I'm here." I looked around the dining room, my dining room, the tables Papa built, the bottles of vodka he'd infused, the legacy I'd fought for. I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I was a warrior, forged in betrayal, stronger than I'd ever known. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time I felt ready to face it. Turning point. As Mama left I stood alone, the borscht still warm in my hands. I wasn't healed, not fully, but I was starting to rebuild. The Tsar's table wasn't just Papa's dream anymore, it was mine, and I'd fight for it again and again, no matter what came next. The weeks after the gala were like walking through fog. The Tsar's table was mine again, but the victory tasted like ash. Rick was in jail. His fraud charges splashed across every Chicago news outlet. Sterling Hospitality was reeling, their acquisition plans buried under a mountain of SEC investigations. Julian Vance had vanished, his polished persona exposed as a lie. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was hollow. The restaurant was safe, but my family was broken. Mama's betrayal lingered like a bruise, and every time I looked at her, I saw her guilty tears, her whispered, "It was for the best." I moved into a tiny apartment in Logan Square, a far cry from the Gold Coast condo's sterile luxury. The new place smelled of fresh paint and possibility, but it was lonely. Mama texted me short messages about nothing, whether a new recipe she'd tried. I responded, but my words were clipped, guarded. Forgiveness felt like a mountain I wasn't ready to climb. At the restaurant the buzz was relentless. The Chicago Tribune ran a feature calling me the woman who saved the Tsar's table, and reservations stretched into next year. Customers came for Papa's pelmeni and stayed for the story, a scrappy daughter taking on corporate giants. I smiled for the cameras, poured vodka shots for the regulars, but inside, I was still that girl in the dark dining room, crying over Papa's photograph. One morning, while sorting through old invoices, I found a letter tucked in a ledger, written in Papa's slanted handwriting. It was dated a month before he died, addressed to me. "Eleanor, my heart," it began. "This place is yours, not just because you're my daughter, but because you have the fire to keep it alive. Never let anyone take that from you." I read it over and over, tears smudging the ink. He'd known I could fight. He'd believed in me, even when I didn't. That night, I made a decision. Sterling was hosting another event, a rebranding for one of their other properties, a swanky hotel downtown. Lachlan Pierce would be there, smarming it up for the press. I didn't need to confront him again, but I wanted to. I wanted him to know I wasn't just some footnote in his corporate game. I called my Tribune friend who got me an invite as a local business leader. The hotel ballroom was all chandeliers and champagne, a world away from the Tsar's table's warmth. I wore a black dress, the same one I'd worn that first night of Rick's ambush, but this time, I felt like a warrior. Pierce spotted me across the room, his sharp grin faltering for a split second. I raised my glass to him. A silent toast. He didn't approach, but I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. Later, as I left, I passed a reporter from a local blog. "Eleanor Petrov, right?" she said, scribbling in her notebook. "Any comment on Sterling's collapse?" I smiled, my voice steady. "The Tsar's table is still standing, that's my comment." Turning point. Driving home I felt a shift. The weight I'd carried for months, Rick's betrayal, Mama's silence, Julian's con, was still there, but it was lighter. Papa's letter had reminded me who I was. I wasn't just fighting for his dream anymore, I was fighting for mine. The road ahead was long, but I was ready to walk it. The Tsar's table reopened on a crisp February morning, the Chicago skyline glinting through a fresh layer of snow. The dining room was packed, the air alive with the clink of glasses and the low hum of conversation. I moved through the tables, checking on guests, my hands steady for the first time in months. The staff, Tommy, our line cooks, the servers who'd stuck by me through the chaos, worked like a well-oiled machine. They called me boss now, not just out of habit, but with a respect that made my chest ache. I'd spent weeks rebuilding, not just the restaurant but myself. I hired a new accountant to untangle Rick's mess, ensuring every cent he'd stolen was accounted for. The SEC was still sniffing around Sterling, and Lachlan Pierce had resigned, his reputation in tatters. Julian Vance was a ghost, his Vance Group exposed as a front. The legal battles weren't over, but the Tsar's table was mine, 100%, and no one could take it away. Mama and I were still fragile. We talked more now, short phone calls that tiptoed around the past. She'd moved out of the condo into a small place in Evanston and was seeing a therapist. I wasn't ready to forgive her fully, but I could feel the edges softening. She'd been scared, manipulated by Rick's threats, and while it didn't erase the hurt, it made her human again. One Sunday, before service, the restaurant was quiet, the morning light filtering through the windows. I was polishing the bar, lost in thought, when the door creaked open. Mama stood there holding a small steaming pot. "Borscht," she said, her voice soft, almost shy. "From Mikhail's recipe." I froze, the rag still in my hand. She set the pot on the bar, her eyes searching mine. "I found his old cookbook in a box," she said. "I thought, maybe we could make it together." I swallowed hard, the familiar scent of beets and dill pulling me back to childhood, to Papa's laughter in the kitchen. I took the pot, my hands trembling, and ladled out a spoonful. It was perfect, rich, tangy, just like his. Tears pricked my eyes as I took a bite, the warmth spreading through me like a memory. "He'd be proud, Eleanor," Mama said, her voice breaking. "Not just that you saved this place, but how you did it. You're stronger than I ever was." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who'd loved Papa, who'd lost him too, who'd made mistakes but was trying to make them right. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "but I want to try." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm here, Eleanor, whenever you're ready." I looked around the dining room, Papa's tables, the bottles of vodka he'd infused, the legacy I'd fought for. It wasn't just his anymore. It was mine. I'd turned betrayal into strength, loss into hope. The Tsar's table wasn't just a restaurant, it was my heart, my fire, my future. As Mama left, I stood alone, the borscht still warm in my hands. The road ahead was uncertain, there'd be more fights, more scars, but I was ready. I wasn't just Mikhail Petrov's daughter. I was Eleanor Petrov, and I'd build something new from the ashes of the old. I started this journey believing I was fighting for my father's dream, but I ended it by realizing I was fighting for my own. My story is a testament to the fact that legacy is not a relic to be protected behind glass. It is meant to be lived, challenged, and reshaped. My advice to anyone feeling trapped by the past is this: honor what came before you by having the courage to make it your own. Don't just be the keeper of a dream, be its future. Define your own terms and build something that is unapologetically yours.